Beneath the earth of Louisiana, hidden in hand-dug bunkers that stretched like veins under the plantations, an army of enslaved warriors was preparing for something their oppressors never imagined possible. Not escape, not survival, but organized resistance that would shake the foundations of the entire system of bondage. This is the true story of the men and women who built an underground network of rebellion, who trained in secret, who strategized with the precision of military tacticians, and who proved that the human spirit, even when chained, can forge weapons from hope and transform suffering into strength. If you want to follow more stories of incredible strategy, courage, and the hidden resistance movements that changed history, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. Now let me take you back to 1850, to the parishes of Louisiana, where beneath the cotton fields and sugarcane plantations, a revolution was being quietly planned in the darkness underground. The bunkers were not built for rebellion initially, they were built for survival. Louisiana was a place of brutal heat and brutal enslavement, where sugarcane harvesting killed more enslaved people than any other crop, because of the exhausting, dangerous work and the relentless pace demanded during harvest season. On the Beaumont plantation, one of the largest sugar operations in St. James Parish, the enslaved population had dug a series of underground cellars and tunnels over the course of 20 years, ostensibly for storing tools and preserving food, but also for something the enslaver, Marcus Beaumont, never suspected: creating spaces where people could gather away from the watchful eyes of overseers, spaces where they could speak freely, plan collectively, and maintain their humanity in a system designed to strip it away. The man who transformed these survival bunkers into something more organized, something closer to a military installation, was named Freeman. That was not the name his mother gave him when he was born in 1815 on a plantation in Virginia, but it was the name he claimed for himself when he was 20 years old, after watching his sister sold away to a plantation in Mississippi, never to be seen again. "They can call me whatever they want in the daylight," he told himself, "but in my heart, in my mind, in these underground places where I am my true self, I am Freeman, because my spirit has never been enslaved." He had been sold to the Beaumont plantation 5 years earlier, and in that time he had become someone the community trusted, someone with vision and organizational skill. Freeman was 35 years old in 1850, a tall man with strong hands and an even stronger mind, someone who understood that individual resistance was noble, but collective resistance was powerful. He worked as a blacksmith on the plantation, which gave him access to tools and metal, and more importantly, gave him mobility between different areas of the property. He used that mobility to observe, to learn, to understand the patterns of the overseers and the vulnerabilities of the system. He noticed that the enslaved population on Beaumont Plantation, nearly 200 people, had skills that collectively represented a complete economy. Blacksmiths, carpenters, cooks, field workers who knew agriculture, healers who knew medicine, people who could read despite it being illegal, people who had fought in their homelands in Africa before being captured and brought to America in chains. "We are not weak," Freeman thought. "We are an army without weapons, a nation without land, but we are capable of more than they can imagine." The bunkers became Freeman's classroom and command center. The main bunker was approximately 30 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 6 feet high, dug carefully over years, reinforced with stolen timber, and accessed through hidden entrances, in tool sheds, and under false floorboards in cabins. The air was damp and close, lit by small oil lamps that had to be kept dim to avoid detection. It was here that Freeman began gathering people, not everyone, because trust had to be earned and tested, but a core group of about 30 individuals who he believed had the courage, intelligence, and commitment for what he was planning. Among them were men and women whose names deserve to be remembered. There was Cato, a man of 50 who had been born in what is now Senegal and who remembered fighting as a young warrior before being captured by slavers. He still carried the knowledge of military tactics, of formation fighting, of how to move as a coordinated unit. There was Harriet, not the famous Harriet Tubman, but another Harriet, a woman of 40 who worked in the main house as a cook and who had access to information about when slave patrols came through, about which overseers were more brutal and which were lazy, about when Beaumont had visitors or business away from the plantation. She was the intelligence network, the eyes and ears that made planning possible. There was young Marcus, no relation to the enslaver despite sharing his first name. A man of 22 who could read and write because he had been taught in secret by an elderly enslaved man who had since died. Marcus became the record keeper, writing down plans and information in a coded language that looked like random scratches if discovered. There was Delilah, a woman of 35 who was one of the plantation healers, skilled in using herbs and plants not just to cure illness, but to create compounds that could be useful in other ways, substances that could make someone appear sick when they were not, allowing them to avoid work and gather intelligence, substances that could be mixed into food or water to cause temporary disorientation in those who consumed it. Delilah understood chemistry in a way that would not be formalized for decades, but her knowledge was ancestral, passed down through generations, and it was powerful. There was Solomon, a carpenter of 45 who could build anything and who had been secretly reinforcing the bunker structures, creating hidden compartments within them, designing collapsible supports that could bring tunnels down if they were discovered, preventing others from following. There was Rebecca, a field worker of 28 who was extraordinarily strong and who had taken on the role of physical trainer, teaching others how to fight with their hands, how to use farm implements as weapons, how to move silently and quickly. These were the core leaders, but there were 24 others in the bunker network, all contributing their skills and knowledge. They called themselves the Warriors, not because they romanticized violence, but because they understood they were fighting for their survival, their dignity, and their humanity. Freeman made the purpose clear from the beginning. We are not planning to escape, we are planning to resist. We are planning to make this plantation, and eventually others, so difficult and dangerous to operate that the system itself becomes unsustainable. We will sabotage equipment. We will slow production. We will create fear in the overseers. We will protect each other from punishment. We will gather weapons. And when the time is right, when we are prepared and when circumstances align, we will rise up and take this plantation by force, hold it, and use it as a symbol that enslaved people are not powerless, that we can fight back, that we are human beings who will not accept this forever. The reaction to Freeman's plan was mixed initially. Some people thought it was suicide, that it would only lead to brutal retaliation. Cato, the elder warrior, was one of the skeptics. Freeman, I admire your courage, but you do not know what you are asking. I have seen rebellions. I was part of one on the ship that brought me here. We killed several crew members and took control of the vessel for 3 days before British naval ships intercepted us and put down the uprising. Everyone who survived was tortured as an example. What you are talking about will bring that kind of retaliation on everyone here, not just us, but the children, the elderly, everyone. Freeman listened carefully, then responded, You are right that there will be retaliation. But there is already retaliation every single day. People are beaten, starved, raped, killed, worked to death. We are living in constant retaliation for the crime of being born. What I am proposing is that we choose our suffering instead of having it imposed on us. If we are going to suffer anyway, let it be while fighting, not while submitting. That answer changed the energy in the bunker. People began to see Freeman's point. The suffering was already happening. At least resistance gave it meaning, gave it purpose. Cato stood up, walked over to Freeman, and placed his hand on the younger man's shoulder. You remind me of the warriors I knew as a young man. You speak truth. I am with you. And I will teach everyone here what I know about fighting as a unit. about tactics, about how to turn a group of individuals into an army. That was the moment the movement truly began, when the elder warrior endorsed the younger leader's vision, when intergenerational knowledge and contemporary courage merged into something powerful. Over the next 6 months, the bunker became a training ground. They could only meet at night, after the plantation had gone quiet, and they could only stay for a few hours at a time before needing to return to their cabins to avoid suspicion. But in those hours, transformation happened. Cato taught formation tactics, how to move together, how to support each other in combat, how to use spears and clubs which they had secretly made from farm tools and wood. Rebecca taught hand-to-hand fighting, techniques for disarming someone with a weapon when you have none, techniques for using an attacker's strength against them. Solomon taught how to set up ambushes, how to create obstacles and traps using materials found on the plantation. Delilah taught about poisons and sedatives, about which plants could incapacitate someone without killing them, about how to treat wounds and injuries that would inevitably occur. Marcus, the young man who could read and write, became the strategic planner. He created maps of the plantation, marking patrol routes, marking where weapons were stored in the overseer's building, marking which routes led to neighboring plantations and which led to swamps where they could hide if necessary. He also began documenting everything, writing down the training, the plans, the names of everyone involved. Freeman asked him why he was doing that, and Marcus answered, "Because even if we fail, even if we all die, someone will find this someday. And they will know that we were here, that we resisted, that we were not passive victims. They will know our names and our strategies. That matters. Memory matters." Freeman understood immediately. This was not just about winning or losing. It was about making a mark on history that could not be erased. But the warriors were not just training for combat. They were also engaging in systematic sabotage. Tools would break at critical moments, not obviously enough to be blamed on anyone specific, but frequently enough to slow work and cost Beaumont money. Sugarcane would be cut incorrectly, reducing yield. Horses would become mysteriously sick, requiring time to recover. Equipment would disappear and reappear in wrong locations, creating confusion and inefficiency. These small acts of resistance added up, and Beaumont began noticing that his plantation was underperforming compared to others in the region. He blamed the overseers, who then became more brutal toward the enslaved population, which was exactly what Freeman predicted. When they become more brutal, more people will join us. When people see that submission does not protect them from violence, they will understand that resistance is the only rational choice. Freeman was right. As the overseers increased their violence, more people approached the warriors wanting to join, wanting to be part of something that fought back instead of just enduring. By the end of 1850, the core group had grown from 30 to nearly 70 people, over a third of the adult enslaved population on the Beaumont plantation. They could not all fit in the main bunker, so they expanded, digging new tunnels, creating new meeting spaces, always careful to remove dirt in ways that would not be noticed, mixing it into garden soil, dispersing it at night. The bunker network grew like a root system under the plantation, invisible from above but strong and extensive below. One of the most important developments came from Harriet, the woman who worked in the main house. She overheard a conversation between Beaumont and a neighboring plantation owner named Carlyle. Carlyle was complaining about resistance on his own plantation, about work slowdowns and mysterious accidents. "I am telling you, Marcus, something is happening. It is too coordinated to be coincidence. I think they are organizing somehow. I have hired additional patrols, and I am considering bringing in slave breakers from Mississippi, people who know how to crush rebellion before it starts." Beaumont had responded, "I have noticed similar problems. Maybe we should coordinate our security, share information about troublemakers, show a unified front." This conversation terrified Harriet initially, but when she reported it to Freeman, he saw opportunity. If they are worried enough to coordinate with each other, it means we are having an impact. It also means we need to accelerate our timeline. We cannot wait another year. We need to strike within the next few months before they bring in outside forces. The decision to accelerate the timeline created urgency and also fear. Were they ready? Did they have enough weapons? Did they have a clear enough plan? Freeman called a meeting of all the warriors in the main bunker, the space so crowded that people had to sit shoulder to shoulder. He stood at one end, lit by lamplight, and spoke. "I know you are afraid. I'm afraid too. But I want you to understand something. What we are doing here is not just about this plantation. Word is spreading to other plantations about resistance, about sabotage, about people fighting back. If we can take this plantation and hold it even for a week, even for a day, it will inspire others. It will prove that this system is not invincible. We will probably not win in the long term. They have more weapons, more people, the law on their side. But we can win symbolically. We can prove that enslaved people are warriors, are strategists, are fully human and capable of organized resistance. That is worth dying for." Cato stood up next to Freeman. "I am an old man. I have lived under bondage most of my life. If I die fighting for freedom, even if that freedom only lasts a day, I will die happy. I will die as a warrior, not as property. That is all I want." One by one, others stood and voiced their commitment. Rebecca: "I have a daughter who is 7 years old. She lives on another plantation, sold away from me 2 years ago. I will never see her again. But maybe if we do this, maybe she will hear about it someday. Maybe she will know her mother was a warrior. That is enough for me." Solomon: "I have built so much for them, houses and furniture and tools. I have built wealth for people who do not see me as human. It is time I build something for us. Even if that something is just a moment of freedom." Delilah: "I have healed people just so they could go back to work and be exploited more. I am tired of healing people just so they can suffer longer. I want to heal people so they can fight. Let us do this." The plan they developed was complex and risky, but it was sound. They would act during the peak of sugar harvest season when everyone was exhausted and when Beaumont and the overseers were focused on production. They would strike at night, simultaneously taking control of the overseer quarters, the main house, and the armory where weapons were kept. They would use the element of surprise and the fact that the warriors had trained together while the overseers had not. They would hold the plantation for as long as possible, sending word to neighboring plantations to encourage others to rise up. They knew it would end badly, that eventually militia or federal troops would be called in, that many of them would die. But they also knew that the story would spread, that their resistance would be remembered, that they would prove something essential about their humanity. The night of the uprising was chosen. December 23rd, 1850. 2 days before Christmas, when Beaumont had given some of the overseers time off, and when security would be at its lowest. The warriors spent the days leading up to it, gathering final supplies, sharpening tools into weapons, making peace with their own mortality. Freeman spent time with each person individually, thanking them, telling them they were brave, making sure they knew they could back out at any time without judgment. No one backed out. They had come too far, believed too deeply to turn back now. On the night of December 22nd, 1 day before the planned uprising, something unexpected happened that would change everything. A young enslaved boy from a neighboring plantation, a child of about 10 named Isaac, appeared at the Beaumont plantation in the middle of the night, having run through the woods in darkness to bring a warning. He found Freeman and gasped out his message. "The militia knows. Someone told them about the plan. They are coming tomorrow with 50 armed men. They are going to arrest everyone they suspect and make examples of them. They know about the bunkers." Freeman felt ice run through his veins. They had been betrayed. Someone had talked. There was no time to figure out who or why. They had hours, not days, to decide what to do. Freeman immediately called an emergency meeting in the main bunker. He explained the situation. They had 3 choices: scatter and hope not to be identified, surrender and hope for mercy, or accelerate the plan and strike tonight, right now, before the militia arrived. The bunker was silent for a long moment, and then Cato spoke. "We have no good options. If we scatter, they will hunt us down one by one. If we surrender, they will torture us to get names of everyone involved and then execute us publicly. If we strike now, we have surprise, but we are less prepared. But at least if we strike now, we go down fighting on our terms." Rebecca agreed. "We have trained for this. We have prepared. We might not be perfectly ready, but we are ready enough. If we are going to die anyway, let us die as warriors." Freeman looked around the bunker at faces he had come to love like family, people who had trusted him, who had believed in his vision, who were now about to risk everything because of a plan he had initiated. "This is my responsibility. If you want to blame someone, blame me. But if you are willing to follow me one more time, we move now. We have 4 hours until dawn. We take the plantation. We hold it for as long as we can, and we make sure the world knows we were here." Every hand in that bunker went up. Every single person chose to fight. Freeman felt tears burn his eyes but did not let them fall. There would be time for tears later, if there was a later. Right now, there was only action. They moved with the precision of the military unit they had trained to become. The group split into 4 teams. Team 1, led by Cato, would take the overseer quarters. Team 2, led by Rebecca, would secure the armory. Team 3, led by Solomon, would control the main house and take Beaumont into custody. Team 4, led by Delilah, would secure the perimeter and prevent anyone from leaving to call for help. Freeman would coordinate between all teams, moving as needed to support wherever resistance was strongest. They synchronized their movements, agreeing to strike simultaneously at exactly 2 hours before dawn, when human alertness is at its lowest. At the designated time, the warriors emerged from the bunkers like spirits rising from the earth, silent and determined. They moved through the darkness toward their targets. Cato's team reached the overseer quarters first, a long building where 6 overseers slept. They entered through windows and doors simultaneously, overwhelming the sleeping men before they could react. Within minutes, all 6 overseers were bound and gagged, disarmed of their weapons, which included rifles, pistols, and whips. Not a single shot had been fired, not a single alarm raised. The element of surprise was total. Rebecca's team reached the armory, which was locked, but which Solomon had taught them how to open using tools he had created. They broke in and found a cache of weapons, 20 rifles, a dozen pistols, ammunition, and blades. They distributed the weapons among themselves, and for the first time in their lives, these enslaved people held firearms not as tools of their oppression, but as instruments of their liberation. Rebecca held a rifle in her hands and thought, "I am no longer defenseless. I am no longer just a victim waiting to be saved. I am a warrior, and I will fight for my freedom." Solomon's team approached the main house, the large plantation mansion where Beaumont lived with his wife and 2 teenage children. This was the most morally complicated target because there were people inside who were not directly responsible for the day-to-day brutality, even if they benefited from the system. Freeman had been clear in his instructions. "We are not murderers. We are warriors fighting for liberation. We will take them prisoner. We will treat them humanely. We will not harm them unless they resist violently. We are better than the system that created us, and we will prove it through our actions." Solomon's team entered the house quietly, moving through rooms they had cleaned and cooked in and served in for years, but now moving through them as liberators, not as servants. They found Beaumont asleep in the master bedroom. Solomon stood over him, rifle in hand, and said quietly, "Mr. Beaumont, you are now our prisoner. Do not move, do not shout, do not resist. If you cooperate, you will not be harmed." Beaumont woke in confusion and terror, seeing enslaved people he had owned now armed and in control. His wife screamed but was quickly silenced by one of the team members who assured her they would not be hurt if they did not resist. The teenage children were brought into the room, frightened but unharmed. Solomon looked at them and felt something unexpected: pity. They were children who had been raised in this system, taught that it was normal and natural to own other human beings. They were victims of a different kind of dehumanization, the kind that convinces you that you are superior when you are just complicit in evil. Within an hour, the Beaumont plantation was under the complete control of the warriors. The overseers were imprisoned in one of their own buildings. The Beaumont family was under guard in the main house, treated with basic decency, but stripped of power. The armory had been seized, and warriors now stood guard at every entrance to the plantation, armed and alert. They had done it. They had taken control of an entire plantation without firing a single shot, without killing anyone, with precision and coordination that would have impressed any military commander. Freeman stood in the center of the plantation yard as dawn began to break, and for the first time in his life, he stood on that ground as a free man. The plantation did not belong to Beaumont anymore. It belonged to the people who had built it, planted it, harvested it, maintained it with their labor and their blood and their tears. It belonged to them. But Freeman knew this moment was temporary. The militia was coming, possibly as soon as today. They had hours, maybe a day, before overwhelming force would arrive to retake the plantation and punish everyone involved. The question was what to do with that time. Some warriors wanted to burn everything, to destroy the plantation entirely as an act of symbolic rejection. Others wanted to flee, to use their weapons and supplies to escape north while they had the chance. But Freeman proposed something different. "We stay. We hold this ground. We send messengers to every plantation within 20 miles telling them what we have done, inviting them to join us. If even one other plantation rises up, if even one more group of enslaved people sees their freedom, then this becomes bigger than us. And when the militia comes, we negotiate. We have hostages. We have leverage. We demand freedom for everyone involved in exchange for the safe release of the Beaumont family. Maybe it works, maybe it does not, but we try." The warriors voted, and Freeman's plan won by a narrow margin. They would stay and fight, but they would also try to use their position strategically. Messengers were sent out immediately, young and fast runners who could move through the woods and reach neighboring plantations before the militia could stop them. The messages were simple. The enslaved people of Beaumont Plantation have freed themselves. We control the land, the weapons, and the oppressors. We invite you to join us. Together we are stronger. Together we can change this system. Rise up. Be free. By midday on December 23rd, word had spread to at least 15 neighboring plantations. No one knew how those communities would respond, whether fear or hope would win, whether others would have the courage to join the uprising. The first sign of response came in the early afternoon. A group of 20 enslaved people from the neighboring Hartwell plantation arrived at Beaumont, armed with farm tools, having overpowered their overseer and walked away from their bondage. They were led by a woman named Charlotte, who was nearly 60 years old, and who said simply, "We heard what you did. We heard you were free. We want to be free too. What can we do to help?" Freeman embraced her and welcomed them into the warrior community. Now they were 90 strong. Then more arrived from another plantation, then more from another. By evening, nearly 200 enslaved people from 5 different plantations had converged on the Beaumont plantation, all armed, all determined, all ready to defend their claim to freedom. What happened next would become known in whispered stories and coded songs for generations. The Standing. For 3 days, from December 23rd to December 25th, 1850, the enslaved people of those Louisiana parishes held their ground. The militia arrived on the morning of December 24th. 50 men, as the young boy Isaac had warned. But they stopped at the edge of the plantation when they saw 200 armed black people standing in formation, organized and ready to fight. The militia commander, a man named Colonel Hutchins, had expected to find scattered, disorganized runaways. Instead, he found an army. Freeman, as the leader, walked forward under a white flag to negotiate. Colonel Hutchins met him halfway, and for the first time in his life, Freeman stood face to face with a white man, not as a subordinate but as an equal, as a military commander negotiating with another military commander. "We have taken control of this plantation and several others," Freeman said calmly. "We have hostages, including the Beaumont family, and we have weapons. We do not want unnecessary bloodshed. We are proposing the following terms. You allow us safe passage north to free territory with our weapons and supplies, and we release the hostages unharmed. You have 2 hours to consider our proposal." Hutchins was stunned by Freeman's articulate speech, his confidence, his strategic thinking. It contradicted everything the ideology of slavery claimed about the intellectual inferiority of black people. Hutchins went back to his forces to discuss, and Freeman returned to the warriors. "Do you think he will agree?" Cato asked. Freeman shook his head. "No. The system cannot allow us to succeed because it would prove that everything they believe is a lie. They would rather see us all dead than let us walk away free. But we made the offer anyway because we wanted to show that we are reasonable, that we are moral, that we are human. When they refuse, when they attack, the world will know that they chose violence, not us." Freeman was right. 2 hours later, Hutchins sent back his response. "Surrender immediately and unconditionally. Release all hostages. Give up your weapons. If you do this within 1 hour, the leaders will be executed, but the others will be returned to their plantations. If you do not, we will attack with full force, and everyone will be killed." Freeman brought that message back to the warriors, and they took a vote. 200 voices said no. They would not surrender. They would not return to bondage. They would fight. If they died, they would die free, even if that freedom only lasted 3 days. The battle began at dawn on December 25th, Christmas morning. The militia had been reinforced overnight and now numbered over 100 armed men with military training and superior weapons. The warriors had numbers but inferior arms and minimal military experience beyond what Cato had taught them. The militia attacked from 3 sides, trying to overwhelm through coordinated assault. But the warriors had prepared defenses, had set up barricades, had positioned their shooters strategically. They fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. For 6 hours, the battle raged, and against all odds, the warriors held their ground. But eventually, superior firepower and training took their toll. The warriors began to run out of ammunition. Their defensive positions were broken by sustained attack. The militia breached the perimeter and began hand-to-hand combat in the plantation yard. Cato was shot leading a countercharge, dying instantly, but not before taking down 3 militia members. Rebecca fought with a ferocity that terrified the men who faced her, using her rifle until it was empty, then using it as a club, then fighting with her bare hands until she was overwhelmed. Solomon died defending the bunker entrance, preventing the militia from discovering the full extent of the tunnel network. Delilah was captured while trying to treat wounded warriors, refusing to abandon them even when she could have escaped. Freeman continued to fight and coordinate until there was nothing left to coordinate. The warriors were being killed or captured one by one. In the final moments, as the militia closed in on him, Freeman thought about what they had accomplished. They had held 5 plantations for 3 days. They had proven that enslaved people could organize, could fight, could build military strategy, could stand against the full power of the state. They had shown that the ideology of slavery was built on lies. They had made a mark on history that could never be erased. He felt peace in that knowledge. When the militia finally reached him, he was standing over the bodies of fallen warriors, rifle empty, but head held high. "We were never your property," he said to the militia commander. "We were always human. We were always warriors. And you will never make people forget that." Then he was shot, and Freeman, who had never been enslaved in spirit even when his body was chained, died free. The aftermath of the standing was brutal, as everyone had known it would be. The surviving warriors, about 40 people who had been captured, were subjected to show trials and public executions designed to terrorize other enslaved populations. Their bodies were displayed as warnings, but the intended effect did not fully work. Yes, people were terrified, but they were also inspired. Word of the standing spread across the South, carried in songs and stories, whispered in slave quarters from Virginia to Texas. People learned that enslaved people at Beaumont and neighboring plantations had seized their freedom, had fought the militia for 3 days, had shown extraordinary courage and skill. Young enslaved people heard those stories and started to see themselves differently, not as victims, but as potential warriors, not as property, but as human beings capable of resistance. The bunkers were discovered after the battle, and the militia was shocked by what they found: extensive tunnel networks, training materials, written records, maps, strategic documents. It proved that this had not been a spontaneous uprising, but a carefully planned operation that had taken months of preparation. Marcus's records, which he had hidden in a sealed container in a deep part of the bunker, were never found by the militia. But they were recovered years later during Reconstruction by a formerly enslaved man who had known about the location. Those records documented everything: the names of all the warriors, their training, their strategies, their hopes. Marcus had written on the last page, "We did not win, but we fought. We were not free for long, but we were free. We proved that the system that claims to own us does not own our spirits, our minds, our courage. We proved we are human. That is enough." Those records eventually made their way to abolitionists in the North, who published parts of them in anti-slavery newspapers. The story of the Louisiana warriors became a powerful piece of abolitionist propaganda, evidence that enslaved people were not passive victims waiting to be saved, but active agents fighting for their own liberation. Frederick Douglass wrote about the standing, calling it proof that the Negro is a man, a warrior, and a strategist equal to any white man, and that the system of slavery is maintained only through overwhelming force, not through natural order. Harriet Tubman, who knew about resistance networks throughout the South, said that the warriors of Louisiana inspired her own work, showing her that organized resistance was possible even in the deepest heart of slave territory. But perhaps most importantly, the standing changed how enslaved people saw themselves. For decades after 1850, when people in Louisiana spoke about resistance, they spoke about Freeman and Cato and Rebecca and the warriors who had held the Beaumont plantation for 3 days. Parents told their children about the bunkers, about the training, about the battle. Those children grew up with a different self-image than their parents had, grew up knowing that their people had fought back, had been warriors, had been free even if only briefly. When the Civil War came and enslaved people were finally able to fight openly for their freedom, many of them carried the story of the Louisiana warriors with them, saw themselves as continuing that legacy of resistance. The truth about the black warriors under the Louisiana bunkers is this: they were not superhuman, they were fully human. They were intelligent, strategic, courageous, and determined. They used the resources available to them, built collective power through organization and training, and fought for their dignity and freedom with everything they had. They lost the battle in a military sense, but they won something more important. They proved that enslaved people were capable of sophisticated resistance, that the system of slavery was vulnerable, that freedom was worth dying for. They proved their humanity in the most powerful way possible, through action, through sacrifice, through refusal to accept dehumanization even when death was the consequence. What we learn from their story is that resistance takes many forms, and that organization and strategy are as important as courage. Freeman and the warriors did not act impulsively. They prepared for months, trained, gathered intelligence, built alliances. They understood that individual acts of resistance, while important, could be amplified through collective action. They created an infrastructure of resistance, literally underground, that allowed them to maintain security while building power. That same strategic thinking has informed resistance movements throughout history, from the Underground Railroad to the Civil Rights Movement to contemporary struggles for justice. We also learn about the importance of intergenerational knowledge transfer. Cato brought military knowledge from Africa. Delilah brought healing knowledge passed down through generations. Marcus brought literacy that had been secretly taught. Freeman brought carpentry skills learned through his trade. Every generation and every individual brought something essential, and together they created something more powerful than any individual could have achieved alone. This is a model for how communities survive oppression, by valuing and preserving knowledge across generations, by recognizing that every person has contributions to make, by building on what came before rather than starting from nothing. We also learn about the moral courage of choosing how you will suffer. The warriors knew they would likely die, but they chose to die fighting for freedom rather than to live in bondage, and that choice was rational, not suicidal. They understood that there are different kinds of death, the slow death of spirit that comes from accepting dehumanization, and the swift death of body that comes from resisting it. They chose the second, and in that choice, they reclaimed their full humanity. That same understanding has motivated people throughout history to risk everything for causes larger than themselves, to say that some things are worth dying for, and that dignity and freedom are among them. The story of the Louisiana warriors also teaches us about memory and how we remember resistance. For generations, this story was suppressed, not taught in schools, not included in history books, because it contradicted the narrative that enslaved people were passive and that emancipation was a gift from benevolent white people, rather than something that enslaved people fought for themselves. But the story survived anyway, carried in oral traditions, in coded songs, in whispered conversations. Memory cannot be completely controlled by those in power. Communities preserve their own stories, honor their own heroes, and pass down truths that official histories try to erase. The warriors of Louisiana were forgotten by mainstream history for over a century. But they were never forgotten by the communities they came from, and eventually their story has been recovered and honored as it should be. As we close this story, think about Freeman standing in that plantation yard at dawn on the day after they took control, looking around at 200 formerly enslaved people standing armed and free, and realizing that they had done something extraordinary. Think about Cato teaching military tactics in a crowded bunker by lamplight, passing down knowledge that had traveled from Africa to Louisiana across decades and oceans. Think about Rebecca training people to fight, transforming field workers into warriors through discipline and practice. Think about young Marcus writing down every name, every plan, every hope, determined that memory would survive even if they did not. Think about all the warriors who fought and died on that Christmas morning, choosing freedom and dignity over submission and survival. Think about what they proved: that the human spirit cannot be permanently chained, that resistance is always possible, that courage can be cultivated and organized, and that freedom, even if it only lasts 3 days, is worth absolutely everything. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about resistance, about strategy, about courage, about what it means to fight for your humanity when systems try to strip it away, Then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you can experience more stories that honor the complexity and power of those who came before us. Share this story with others who need to understand that resistance has always been part of the story of slavery, that people fought back with intelligence and organization, that the warriors existed even when history tried to erase them. Leave a comment telling me what aspect of the warrior's story resonated most with you. These stories are not just history, they are legacy, and remembering them is how we honor the sacrifice and courage of those who made freedom possible. Until next time, remember that beneath the surface, beneath the stories we are told, there are always deeper truths waiting to be discovered. Bunkers full of resistance waiting to be honored, warriors whose names deserve to be spoken aloud. Thank you for listening, and never forget. They were never property. They were always human. They were always warriors, and their fight continues in every generation that refuses to accept injustice.